Bright Tuty. Every student matters.
So before we begin to understand disaster, its management and its prevention, it is very important for us to understand and learn about the meaning of disaster. All right. What does disaster mean? What do we understand when we use the term or when we refer to the term such as disaster? Okay, what does it basically entail? What does this mean, or what do we understand when we talk about disaster? So disaster, the word disaster, it basically means suddenly occurring phenomenon. Okay, these are instances, these are incidents which occur suddenly. Okay, and as it occurs suddenly, it causes large scale destruction both of life as well as property. It leads to the loss of life of many people. It leads to their injury. Along with that, it also causes destruction, complete destruction, or sometimes little destruction of properties, both private and public property. So it leads to destruction of houses. It leads to destruction of roads. It leads to destruction of government buildings, etc. All right. So what we have to understand by disaster is that there are so many incidents that take place and that leads to loss of life, that leads to destruction. But not all are called disaster. Okay, disasters are only those incidents which occur suddenly and it leads to large scale destruction. Okay, so this means that, say for example, you are cycling from your home to the market. On the way, you get hit by a person and then you fall off the bicycle. Now that causes injury to you. That may cause to injury to that person who hit you. Okay, but that incident cannot be called a disaster because that's a small incident which did not cause large scale destruction. Did it cause the destruction of the entire community? Did it cause the destruction of that place, that entire area? Did it cost the life or loss of lives of many people in that area because of that incident? No. Hence, that particular incident of you hitting a person or being hit by a person on a bicycle and falling off the bicycle cannot be called a disaster. It has to be an incident. Say, for example, the rainfall, or a place experiencing rainfall for a month straight without any break, and because of that the increase in the level of the river or the water body or the lake, right, and that leading to flooding of that entire region, causing destruction of property, land, forest, as well as the lives of people living in the villages, in the surrounding area, as well as the wildlife, the threat that it poses to the wildlife. So such incident which causes destruction not only to one person, but to the entire community, the entire forest, the village, that is called a disaster. Okay. So now we know the meaning of disaster. Now, as we have already said again and again, the disaster is large-scale phenomena which causes destruction of life and property. When destructions take place, when things that you use for your everyday life is completely flooded or completely destroyed by, say, for example, landslide, then what do you feel? You feel sad. You feel misery. Right? So destructions like landslides, destructions like flood, which affects thousands of people, right? So those result in misery and in causing sorrow and great sadness among people. It makes people become too poor. It makes people become too needy for medical attention, for medical services. It makes people go hungry and starve. Okay, because they don't have necessary food that they require. So the destruction always results in these miseries and in these sorrows of the people and for the people. All right. So, disasters such as those affect the lives of the people. It affects properties, it affects industry, it affects factories, it affects agriculture as well. So, it affects many aspects of a country. It affects the economy. Okay, it affects its public buildings, it affects its public wealth, etc. Okay, so some of the very common disasters that we know of are earthquakes, floods, cyclones, fires, industrial accidents meaning collapse of the one side of the building, a fire that breaks out in a factory, right, or a leak of gas from an industry or factory, or leak of certain chemicals, etc. So these are disasters. They cause large scale destruction of life as well as property. All right. So that was disaster. Now let's look at types of disaster. What are different types of disaster? How many types of disasters are there? So there are mainly two types of disaster. One is called natural disaster. The second is called man-made disaster. Now let's look at them one by one. First, as we look at natural disaster, now the name itself, natural, it means it happens naturally. Okay, or it is caused by the natural forces of the nature, like air, rain, wind, temperature, etc., water, etc. Okay, so natural disasters are those which are caused as a result of natural processes. Okay, geological processes which involves elements of the nature like temperature, rain, etc. Okay, and this causes, such processes causes loss of life, it injures people, or it also impacts the people's health, it damages property, it leads to the loss of livelihoods of large number of people, and also loss of services. It also leads to the disruption of social and economic aspects. Okay, and it also leads to environmental damage. It leads to the damage of the environment as well. So these incidents where the natural processes leads to causing such disasters, those are called natural disasters. Okay, they are caused by the natural elements, by the natural processes of the nature. Okay, so some of the examples are earthquakes, floods, landslides, cyclones, tsunamis. These are all natural disasters. Okay, so earthquakes are basically movement of the earth, the surface of the earth, right? So land is involved. Now when we talk of flood, it's often caused by the water of the river, overflow of the river. Okay, overflow of the ocean, all that. So here the natural elements are involved in causing the disaster: land, water, air, temperature, etc. All right. Now let's look at the man-made disaster. Now man-made disaster or human-made disaster, they are instigated or caused by the human. So the name itself, man-made, made by the men or the human being, caused by men and human being. Okay, so this is called man-made disaster. The disasters, those are caused, that are caused by men themselves. And they are also caused as a result of technological hazards like negligence. If we make a mistake, okay, say for example we work in a chemical factory and then we neglect the fact that we have to keep on checking that there's no gas leak, there's no chemical leak, but then out of our carelessness we leave, we do not check, we do not pay attention, so that leads to hazards, that leads to cause of damage or disaster. Okay, so such consequences, such negligence also leads to causing disasters, okay, man-made disasters. So some of the examples of man-made disasters are stampedes, fires, transport accidents, road accidents, vehicle accidents, industrial accidents, leaking of gas, leaking of oil, etc. Okay, nuclear explosions, radiations, all right. War is also another example of man-made disasters. Okay, so now let's look at some of the disasters. It does not have to be man-made or natural, but most of the disasters that we are going to look at, almost all of it is natural disasters. So let's look at some of them and try to understand these kind of disasters. So the first that we are going to look at is landslide. So whenever you think of landslide, you have to remember about the mountains and hills, because that's where it occurs. Now, what is a landslide? Landslide is basically movement of a solid mass of land or rock or soil or other materials on the surface of the earth down the slope of a mountain. Okay? So if there are mountains and hills, now imagine there are houses built here, there are towns, villages here. Now suddenly this part of it just begins to slide. The land here begins to slide, and as it slides, it washes the village or the houses or the people living beneath it or below it. Okay, so such movements of land mass, such movement of rocks, debris, soil is called landslide. Okay, now landslide is very often caused by rainfall. If there is too much rainfall, heavy rainfall for a long period of time, that also causes the land mass to slip or slide from the slope of the mountain or hill. Snow melting, okay, the melting of snow also leads to a landslide. Earthquakes also leads to landslide. Volcanic activities, disturbances by human activities such as deforestation, cutting of trees, those also, or explosion. Exploding, say for example, if human beings, if we are making a tunnel through the hill, right, to make the shortest route from one side of the hill to the other side, then we have to burst the rock, right? So as we explode and burst the rock, then sometimes it causes disturbances and that leads to landslide. Okay, so human activities also causes landslides to take place. Now there are other causes of landslides as well. So excessive construction activities leads to landslides on the mountain slopes. Okay, so here in this picture, look at it. There is a slope and there are houses built here. Sometimes excessive number of too many, more than enough, more than what is actually good. So those houses are built on the slope of the mountain. So as the houses are built and as that area gets crowded, then sometimes this slope of the mountain, it begins to slide. Okay, and that leads to occurrences of landslides. All right, so here in this picture you can see how the mass of land from this slope, it just slides along the slope and then it carries this house away out of its way. Okay, so this leads to damage of property, loss of life. It also leads to injured number of injured people. Okay, many people get injured as a result of this disaster. All right, now let's look at another disaster, which is earthquake. Now earthquake is basically shaking of the surface of the earth. When we experience earthquake, what do we experience? The shaking of the surface of the earth. As a result of it, everything on the surface of the earth, buildings, house, roads, everything shakes. Right? Now what causes earthquakes? Now earthquakes are caused by the movement of the tectonic plates. Now what are tectonic plates? The surface of the earth, below the surface of the earth. Now on the surface of the earth is where we have our houses, where we have roads, etc. Beneath the surface of the earth, there is something called plate tectonics, tectonic plates. Okay, so say for example, these are plates and this is the surface where we have buildings, roads, alright. Now beneath the surface there are plates. These are called tectonic plates. Now these plates, sometimes it moves towards each other. Sometimes it moves away from each other. So their movement, when they move suddenly, that also causes shaking of the surface of the earth. And that shaking results in earthquakes. Okay? Now earthquakes are measured by Richter scale. Okay, so earthquake is measured by this instrument on a scale of 0 to 9. Okay, now if the earthquake, if the shaking is between 0 to 4, then it is okay. That is not dangerous. That does not damage property. That does not destroy lives of people. But if it is above 4, 5 to 9 is not okay. It is dangerous. Okay, this is where the buildings start falling off like this. Okay, the roads and sometimes the surface of the earth begins to crack. Okay, the houses begins to crack and they fall over and people get buried underneath the debris of these houses. Okay, or buildings. So such damage of property and life or loss of life is caused as a result of shaking of the earth's surface. Alright. Now earthquake sometimes is also takes place. It also takes place in the ocean. Okay. Now in the ocean, beneath the ocean's bed, again there are tectonic plates. Now the sudden movement of these tectonic plates towards each other, away from each other, again leads to earthquakes. But in the ocean, what happens, because of the shaking of the tectonic plates, this leads to the rise of the water. Okay, in the ocean, and that causes tsunami. Then tsunami also then is very deadly. It damages properties and it also results in loss of livelihood and loss of lives of people. Okay. Now let's look at tsunami, another very dangerous disaster. Now tsunamis are basically series of waves that rise in high tide, okay, that rise very high in a large water body like the ocean, the sea, etc. Okay. Now this is caused by the displacement of water. The water in the ocean, in the sea, begins to displace at such rapid pace that it rises, it leads to the rise of waves at such height, okay, and that sort of engulfs the areas lying near it. Now such displacement of water is caused by earthquakes. We just learned about it, right? How earthquakes also leads to causing tsunami. And tsunamis are also caused by volcanoes, landslides and other disturbances. Okay, so earthquake is not the only cause of tsunami. It's caused by volcanoes, landslides and other disturbances. Now the waves that rise in the ocean, these tsunamis, right? So the waves that rise, those waves rise at a height of 100 meter or even more, and the wave is as wide as few kilometers wide. Okay, so these waves are wide and they are so tall, okay, that it can easily engulf a town. It can easily engulf a bunch of houses together. It's so powerful. So the tsunamis with such tidal waves, with such waves which are tall and wide, they cause large scale destruction of the areas, of the people living in the surrounding areas of where the tsunami has occurred. And it also leads to flooding of the coastal areas. Okay, so these are the effects of tsunami.